everybody, and welcome again to a very special episode this time of The Horror Guys. I'm up here, I'm Alan. Down below me this week is John.
I
And
travel.
he's to my, if you're looking at the screen, he's to your left, my right. That's James Dermond. Did I pronounce your last name
Dermond.
correct? Dermond.
James Dermond.
Okay, James Dermond, I apologize. He is the author to the Doorway to the Unseen book series, which I have right here. And we're going to be interviewing him today. Welcome to the show, James. Welcome to being an honorary horror guy for tonight.
Okay, that's great. I'm glad to be here.
So you have a series of short stories, or short story anthology books that you've written. You're on to the third edition so far. Tell us a little bit about, from your perspective, what these books are about.
Well, I mean, it's kind of just a homage to the horror genre and the short horror story form, and I kind of go over some classic tropes in horror, and there's some things that are entirely original. It's a planned 12-volume series. So the fourth volume will come out in late April this year, and then there'll be another volume in October this year. And then I'll keep going until I reach 12 volumes.
Do you have, when you started undertaking this project, that's a pretty large project. That's a lot of writing.
Yeah.
Did you have everything mapped out, or is it kind of you write as you go? Do you take it one book at a time, or do you have ideas for stories? This is always very interesting to me, getting into the mind of the writer.
Okay, well, I probably have enough for the whole series right now, but things will drop off and other things will be added. As I write the stories in the series, I get ideas for new stories, that hadn't occurred to me before. One of the things that I'm doing is I'm writing prequels and sequels to some of the short stories. Like in volume 2, there was a story about that takes place in medieval Germany, and it's about kind of like werewolves. They're not exactly werewolves, and it involves a silver pendant. And then volume 3 and has the prequel story to that. Did you read Cast in Amber?
I did. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So that's the prequel story that takes place in ancient Rome, where you kind of find out where the amulet came from. And then in volume 4, Forged in Fire will kind of wrap up that 3-part story, where it follows the silver amulet's path through history, and it's a cursed object.
Okay, so these stories, a lot of them, they intertwine with each other as the series goes on. So it's kind of a continuation in many ways.
Yes. So in the volume 1, I wrote a story called Grandfather's Cane. That was like a folk horror and ghost story. And then I wrote the prequel story for that in volume 2, and it's called A God in the Grotto. And you find out about the origin of the main character, who is Grandma Abigail. She was a grandma in the volume 1 story, Grandfather's Cane, and then she was a young girl, about 12, in the volume 2 story, A God in the Grotto. So both are folk horror stories.
Very
and
cool.
They have to do with, how are you familiar with Arthur Machen? He's a Welsh horror writer from the 19th century.
The name does sound familiar to me, but I
Okay,
don't
he
know
is an
that
influence. He's an influence on Stephen King.
Oh, okay.
So
Okay.
he's cited him as being an influence, and he's also influenced other writers like H.P. Lovecraft. He wrote a classic novella called "The Great God Pan," and there's several brief nods to that novella in the short story in volume 2.
So obviously he's one of your influences.
Yeah, one of my influences.
If you had to list, let's say, 3 main influences on your writing in terms of the types of style and the type of things that we'll see in your books, in your opinion, who really influences your style the most?
Okay, H.P. Lovecraft. I mean, he's definitely a big influence. I kind of have his, wordy, verbose writing style. I don't know if you noticed that. I don't try to write in a really concise way, or I give a lot of full descriptions and things like that, and that was part of his style. And then I say that Clive Barker is also a big influence on me. That
Yeah.
his Books of Blood series was part of the inspiration for Doorways to the Unseen. That he had a collection, volume after volume of short stories. And then I'd probably say just the 19th century British horror writers. Outside of that, people
Mhm.
like Arthur Machen and a number of other writers in that era.
You mentioned
It's particularly ghost stories from that era.
right.
The kind of the Victorian ghost story.
And I picked a lot of that. I felt a lot of that reading some of the stories that I read. Um, and I noticed you tend to really like to take, like you had mentioned, like a lot of like one of your stories, Creepy Jane, has some very Bloody Mary vibes, which is a urban legend that I grew up um, being terrified of as a child.
Okay.
And it was cool to kind of read through that and see your kind of take on that. And you mentioned Clive Barker. That's interesting to me because we do a lot of movie coverage on this site, and our fans will recognize that name obviously from some of the films like Candyman that have come out, Hellraiser, the Hellraiser series, and things
Yeah,
like
the
that.
Hellraiser series.
Um, John, I
Yeah,
know
but
you.
it was mostly Books of Blood that was the influence on this series.
Okay,
That have you ever read it or?
I've heard of Books of Blood. I'm not sure what that
Okay.
covers.
Okay. Do you know the Midnight Meat Train? Do you remember
Oh
that? That was
yes,
made into a
yes,
movie.
yeah,
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
that's one of the stories from Books of Blood.
Oh, okay.
So actually, the very end of the second story in Volume 3, At Night's End, is kind of a nod to the book, the short story itself, Books of Blood, where the last few paragraphs where it's describing what's happening, and people that have read both stories will recognize the reference.
Where one of the stories that really intrigued me was Cabin in the Woods. Um,
Okay.
what, where did you get what were you drawing from on that one? Because that's a very interesting. I don't know if it's time travel or um, I don't know how to describe it without ruining it. But but I'm
Okay.
just
Well, okay. Do you know where the flashback sequence where they're describing the ancient city or the forgotten
yes,
city? Do you recognize where that is in the real world?
the actual city.
Yeah, well, not the city, but like the country that it's supposed to be in.
Is that like in the middle? Is that in the Middle East or?
Yeah, it's technically it's the
Yeah.
Middle East, but no, but I mean the country. I started writing that story, when we were withdrawing from Afghanistan.
Okay.
So I just I just thought, well, I'm going to write a story about Afghanistan. What could I come up with?
Right.
So I know that at one time there was an ancient religion in Afghanistan before they converted to Islam, and the story is kind of about that really early prehistory of Afghanistan.
Okay, so there. Okay,
Does
so
that make
there's
sense
yes,
after
it
you've read the
does.
story?
It does,
Okay.
and it actually makes me interesting. It interests me in terms of actually the history of that because I've never really dived deep into that sort of thing. So that's really interesting to me because it seems like you really do take care to actually research the history of everything you're writing about.
Yeah,
Um,
I go into great detail. Like the Cast and Amber story is completely historically accurate down to the decade, around 1 AD.
John, I'm gonna let you go because I've been talking, so I know you had some
Oh
questions.
yeah, I know you have to jump in. But yeah, I mean, I just started
Yeah.
with this idea. I want to write a story about Afghanistan. What can I do? And I
Yeah.
kind of started thinking about it, and I started it started from there, and it grew into a whole story.
And it was this unique thing. It's not a stereotypical thing that you're going to find in most other stories. It's not what readers would expect. I would say.
Yeah, so far that's been the most popular story. Everyone
Yeah,
said that they were really drawn into that, and the twist at the end is really
yeah.
kind of dizzying.
It set up a very cool atmosphere from the beginning too, and you really didn't know where it was going, and that's what was nice. There was a nice twist there.
Okay, thanks.
So
But
I
go
have a
ahead.
question for you.
Sure.
How do you feel about books being turned into films?
I mean, a lot of times something is lost, but sometimes the books or the movies are better than the books. Depending on who it is. Like Stephen King, he's a popular writer. He is a good storyteller, but a lot of the movies that have been made of his stories are actually better than his stories, in my opinion. Especially like The Shining and Pet Cemetery are both better than the original books. Have you guys seen the Pet Cemetery from 1989?
Yeah,
Oh yeah,
yeah,
Okay.
it's a
classic.
Yeah,
great movie.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a great movie and it's genuinely scary. Actually, the novel was scary too. I read it in grade school, but the movies, the original movie is even better, I think. And then
Yeah, it's
Stanley
like a
Kubrick's The Shining is another good example of,
yeah.
I read, I never made it through the whole novella for The Shining, but I'd say that the original remake of The Shining is better than the novella.
Did you grow up watching horror films?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, that's where I started with this. I was on Sledgehammer Horror recently, their YouTube channel,
Oh wow.
and we kind of talked about that. And I talked about the first horror movie I saw was Salem's Lot, and
Wow.
I saw it on broadcast television, back in Detroit when it premiered, and that's where I started. And then I started, I was really young, and I started watching. Horror movies on local TV, and I watch a lot of like B horror movies from the '70s and early '80s, and it's just something that I've always been interested in, involved in. Early fascination that I had with that kind of genre, probably because of my overactive imagination. You know,
So I think
it's much more imaginative than any other genre.
it's probably safe to say that horror is
Yeah.
something you've wanted to write about your entire life. It's
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've always thought about doing this, and I thought, I really should start writing these stories down and, you know, uh, putting them out for the world. Especially because now you don't really need to go through a publishing house. If you just do all the work yourself, I still need like an editor and a book cover designer, but I can do everything else myself now, like the marketing, the formatting and everything. So the traditional publishing industry is no longer as relevant as it was before, where it was kind of, like a long shot if you ever got noticed or had a career, doing
yeah.
this.
You see that with a lot of really with a lot of media nowadays. You mentioned publishing, music, even film and television anymore with the platforms we have available to us. It's really interesting to see what content creators can do on their own. With that in mind, there are probably a lot of aspiring authors out there, many of which might be listening to this show here that we're doing right now. If you could give, one piece of advice that you've learned, and if you could go back to the beginning and take that advice for yourself, what would it be?
Start writing as early as possible. And like in fits and starts, I started writing like in high school and then like in college, and I didn't stay with it. And it's if you're really interested in this, I would just start as a teenager or young adult and work on it every day. Just cut out like an hour of TV and write instead. you know, and you'll have something after a year. I mean, after
Right.
even if you struggle with it, you'll probably have something that's publishable if you write 1 hour a day for a year. And so
Wow.
I'd say that's what I'd do if I'd go back. The other thing is, it seemed like such an improbable thing that it would ever work out. That my work would actually get published, but now it's something. Everything has been changed because of the internet and print on demand, digital publishing. So, but
Interesting.
yeah, that's what I would recommend is if you really want to do this, start as early as possible and stay with it.
Very good. And an hour a day. I mean, that's a better way to look at it than looking at I've got to write this big beginning, middle, and end, and I have to tackle this giant project. It seems like that's a good step by step process to take, and I know from trying to write things myself in the past, it's like writer's block is a real thing, and it hits you. Um,
Yeah.
so how do you overcome that?
Oh, Well, yeah, I mean, it's difficult, especially when you're under a deadline. But writer's block really is just a feeling of overwhelm. Where if you just break it off, like I said, like if you read an hour a day, even if you just get like a few paragraphs down, you're 2 paragraphs ahead than where you were the previous day. So if you
Gotcha.
just keep doing that, every day, if you don't have a deadline to deal with, if you just do it every day for a year, you'll probably have something worth reading at the end of the year. So yeah, it's just that at the beginning it's going to be tough. It's going to be very difficult to write something that people want to read.
Reading your book, being that it's a book of short horror stories, you probably get asked this a lot, but it brought me back to when I was a kid, and everybody remembers Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark.
Yes.
Did you read those books
Well,
growing up?
that was after my time. So I mean,
Okay.
Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. I would have been grown up by then. I think. When were people reading those stories?
Well,
Probably like I'd say like the 80s, around that time, right?
yeah, for me, it
'Cause I
would have
remember
been,
going to like
it would have been
like the
early
book fairs in
90s.
school.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
I remember going
so
to the
I
book.
would because they're aimed at like grade school age children.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah, generally, but
Yeah.
some of
So
those.
yeah, I would have already been a teenager by then. So I would have. I just really never heard of that until the movie came out.
Interesting.
I didn't know it was a thing until they released the movie.
Do you get that question frequently, or am I the first one?
About Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark? Yeah, a few people have asked me about it.
Interesting. So. Yeah, it was just something that popped in my head when I was reading it and going through it because that was the end of, that was the biggest anthology horror story book of my day growing up. And obviously they made the movie about it and things of that nature. So I had to ask you that.
Oh yeah, no, I mean I wasn't influenced by that at all. I was more influenced by. Do you remember Tales from the Dark Side?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I watched that. I'd watch that every Saturday evening. After the Thriller double feature kind of went away. That's what I was watching when I was in grade school. Then I'd watch on that same channel Tales from the Dark Side and Monsters and all that stuff in syndication, like during the 80s. And that's an influence on this series too. But the stories aren't really comedic for the most part. But that format, the horror anthology format, and the kind of stories that they had in there, were an influence on this book. I actually wrote a brief, you could call it a treatise, on why I'm writing this series, and it appears in Volume 2, at the end of Volume 2, and I'll just mention it briefly. So I kind of list off the things that are an influence in shows like Night Gallery, Hammer House of Horror, Dark Room, and Tales from the Dark Side. And then like anthology movies like Trilogy of Terror, The Vault of Horror, Asylum, and movies like that are from an earlier era. But probably like the 80s is the cutoff for the influence on this series.
Okay.
But I mean, did you guys remember Night Gallery? It was kind of like the successor to the Twilight Zone, but it was more of a horror show.
I want to say that I've seen Night Gallery.
It sounds really familiar to me. Yeah.
Okay, so do you remember? Of course, you know who Rod Sterling is, right?
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So he was the host of Night Gallery. So after the Twilight Zone got canceled, then he he pitched the idea for Night Gallery, and I think it lasted several seasons. And it was more of a horror-focused TV show, including several remakes of H.P. Lovecraft stories, including Pickman's Model. And have you read that short story by H.P. Lovecraft?
Pickman's Model?
Yeah, Pickman's Model. Okay, all right. It's just, it's about ghouls in the underworld and things like that. But it's probably, I think, the only televised version of the short story that's ever appeared. And it's actually really good. And remember the Waltons? Do you remember that show, John Boy?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, so
yeah.
there's an episode with improbably John Boy appears as like this. It's supposed to take place in like medieval Wales, and during a famine, and it's about sin eaters, and he plays like the son of a sin eater, and it's a really bizarre, disturbing episode, and it's so strange because someone from the Waltons is in it, and
Yeah.
there's some
Right.
other things, and then Roddy McDowell, who's in the Planet of
Oh,
the Apes
yeah.
movies, he was in the
Yes.
pilot about this kind of like he murders his wealthy uncle to receive his inheritance, and then he gets his comeuppance. Like it's a very that's a particularly good episode if you get a chance to see it. That's the pilot episode of Night Gallery.
Check that
But
out.
they're all free. You can watch these episodes now on the internet for free.
I feel like, yeah, I feel like I've seen some of the because
It sounds
it's very familiar.
Yeah, it sounds
to me.
familiar.
And
Yeah.
and I want to say maybe my father-in-law showed me a couple, because I remember Rod Serling being a part of it, and and it's interesting to me because growing up as a kid, I loved the Tales from the Crypt on HBO, and even some of the old movie, the Tales from the Crypt. So that kind of anthology stuff has always been really interesting to me. But tell us a little bit. You have book number 4 coming out.
Number 4.
When can we expect that?
That will be released at the end of April.
End of April.
So,
Okay.
so it'll be available on Amazon in ebook and paperback format at the end of April.
Okay.
But I'm working on it right now. The first story is called Fear of the Dark, and it's about the Boogeyman.
Nice.
So Creepy Jane was about Bloody Mary, sort of.
Yeah.
It was kind of a composite of different types of Bloody Mary type stories, and then but it really turns out to be something else. It also has a twist, at the end. And then the Boogeyman, though, there's really no twist in this. It is the Boogeyman.
Okay. Okay.
but what happens is surprising, with the characters.
That's also another concept that's always been super interesting to me, and terrifying actually. Ever since I was a kid, and I saw some sort of short film about the Boogeyman, and I haven't been able to find it ever since. But I remember that being terrifying to me. So anything about the Boogeyman, and maybe that's why I'm such a Halloween fan, because Michael Myers being referred to as the Boogeyman throughout the whole thing.
Yeah, he is a type of Boogeyman character.
Yeah.
When I was researching this story, there's a version of the Boogeyman in every culture almost around the world.
Right.
Or like many cultures, like across eras and continents. And actually, this is a different version of the Boogeyman than like the version. This is the German version of the Boogeyman.
Okay.
Okay.
Very interesting.
Nice.
So the German Boogeyman. So I'm intrigued.
It's
for
connected.
Sure.
The story kind of connects to the ancestors of the main character.
Okay.
And you're kind of following the Boogeyman was somehow involved with her great grandfather, and then this kind of they reveal what's happening, why she has such an intense fear of the dark.
Very cool.
And I could do the world premiere of an excerpt if you want me to read part of it right now.
That would actually be awesome.
Yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
so no one has heard this or seen this, not even my editor. So I'll just read it.
Okay, very
So
cool.
the idea is Susan is the main character, and she's had a recurring fear of the dark. She's been very young, and she's recently had like a breakdown, and she returns to therapy, and she has a series. She lives alone in her house, and she's terrified to even come home to a dark house. She leaves the porch lights on, leaves living room lights on. She can't be in a dark room. She has to have night lights. I go into a great deal about the psychology of the fear of the dark, and what the symptoms are and things like that and triggers. And the kind of what's going on is revealed in a series of Zoom calls between her and her older brother. And she's the youngest of the three siblings, and he's the oldest. And he starts telling her about things about their great grandfather, and that, it kind of leads up. She's starting to realize that she's being stalked by the boogeyman. She's not totally, she doesn't totally realize what it is, but there's a reason for it, and it's because of her great grandfather when he was a boy. So that's where I'll leave off. Peter starts telling her this story. So he says, Dad told us another story about great granddad, one even scarier than eating roasted rats. Peter seemed to be assessing Susan as he continued gazing into his webcam. And I suppose you're going to tell me this story whether I want to hear it or not. Susan looked away from her webcam and then turned her head to the open door behind her, the hallway light still on. I was just thinking about this. After the rat story, this one came back to me. It's funny. I hadn't thought about it in so long, as it's out there, to say the least. Peter was no longer smiling. So what is it? What happened to great granddad back in the old country? Susan was intrigued now, even though she felt Peter might be probing her for some reason. Dad told us that a while after eating the rats, things didn't get better for great-great-grandma and the kids. Food was scarce, and she had to put some of the kids in an orphanage, even though she was still caring for the rest of her children. Great-granddad was placed in the orphanage along with several of the youngest siblings so he could keep them safe. He was the oldest boy in the family. The orphanage was packed with children who had lost both of their parents during the war, and the other kids whose families couldn't feed them. The nuns had converted spare rooms in the orphanage into sleeping quarters, with the kids almost piled on top of one another. The first night there, great-granddad was put into a room with his brothers and sisters and about a dozen other children. All of them slept on cots along the bare floor. The room was previously a bedroom for staff at the orphanage, unused for many years, but now appropriated for the orphans. Great-granddad said a nun put them down to bed after saying their prayers, and then took the only light in the room, a candle in its holder, with her as she left for the night. Candles were still in short supply, along with everything else. The bedroom's closet door had been left open by the nuns when they were cleaning out the place so it could be used as a makeshift dorm. Great-granddad's cot was next to the closet. The room was completely dark, but he still couldn't sleep. He was so hungry it kept him awake, even after being fed some dinner along with the other children. After a while, great-granddad had heard a creaking sound as the closet door was pushed further open in the dark. Great-granddad then swears he saw a horrible thing emerge from that closet, close to him, but still passing him by. It looked like a man, but very bent and crooked, too tall and too thin to be a human being. The thing stalked through the sleeping children and then paused near the cot of a little girl, one who had been left all by herself at the orphanage. The thing scooped up the sleeping child and bundled her into a sack it carried, and then silently made its way back to the open closet. Great-granddad wanted to scream, but he held it in, knowing what the monster might do if it hurt him. He closed his eyes, barely being able to see in the room anyway, but not wanting the thing to catch him spying on it. He then said he could feel the thing coming toward the closet, but then pause, as if he might be looking down at him. He then heard the closet door creak shut, but didn't dare open his eyes until he could feel the morning light on them. Susan breathed out, having held her breath near the end of the story. Peter, why did you tell me a story like that? The last thing I need to hear is some spooky tale about dark closets and child snatching. Peter smiled slightly and then peered into his webcam. I just wanted you to know that great-granddad also had a terrible fear of the dark. Maybe it runs in our family. So she kind of realizes that this is towards the end of the story. She starts realizing that maybe her fear of the dark is real. And it's a pretty lengthy story, with a kind of it eventually reveals why she's being stalked by her great-grandfather's, why she's being stalked by the boogeyman that first encountered her great-grandfather.
Very interesting, and
For sure.
I'm very much looking forward to reading that. And I think something that makes a story like that actually so terrifying for everybody is it does kind of, you think of the dark, it's the unknown, what's in the dark, and something we can't see, it's something that's there, and I think no matter who you are, that you can kind of see it from that perspective, which is what I think really works about that sort of story.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really common fear, fear of the dark in children.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to take a moment here because we're coming up on 30 minutes, so I want to make sure that I do this giveaway. I want to give away a copy of James's book. I'm trying. This is very confusing the way you go this way, thinking it's gonna. But
Okay.
Doorways to the Unseen 3. I'm not giving you my copy. It will be a brand new copy, so that the corners won't be all twisted. All you got to do is just leave a comment on this video. We're going to give it a week. We're going to announce it next week when we do our show, the winner, and we will get in touch with the person who wins the book. I want to just say the comment has to be, in order to qualify, the comment has to be substantive.
There we go.
Tying up my tongue.
Yeah, I spend all my time in front of the Merriam-Webster's on a bridge, so
Thank God one of us has. Thank God one of us has. Substantive and to what we're talking about. So it can't just be, hey, I want to win the book. Also, I don't know who's doing this, but somebody must be leaving some pretty terrible comments on our or somebody's leaving comments and deleting them. I don't know what's going on. Or if YouTube's deleting them, that means somebody's leaving comments on our page that are being deleted by YouTube for policy issues. So I have not seen what the comments are. So obviously, if your comment gets deleted by YouTube, it's not going to qualify for the contest. Is kind of where I'm going with this. It will qualify for the giveaway, but so if you want to say something mean to us, just keep it within the realm of policy guidelines, I guess.
We'll take it. Just keep it fairly nice, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, whatever. I don't know what this person keeps saying, but YouTube is just not having any of it. So it's not us deleting it. I promise you that.
I can only imagine.
I could only imagine as well. But that being said, I do want to give a copy of this away because James has the 4th edition coming out, and I think that we got a great excerpt from a very interesting story that's going to be in the 4th book. There are some really cool stories in this one. I really recommend it. I really have enjoyed what I've read. I have a 5-year-old and a 1.5-year-old, so it's been difficult for me to really have the time to sit down and read for hours at a time like I'd like to. But I've really made an effort to read a bunch in this one, and I have to say, well done. It was a very interesting book. The stories in it are their own, but they also have some familiarity to them. So, and that's a hard thing to do. So nice work.
Okay,
for sure.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the intention of this series too, is that a lot of people don't have time to read a novel. So if you have just 1 hour a night, or just a few hours a week, you can just read through this. Readers have told me that they read one story before bed every night for a week.
Yeah.
And then they've read all 6 stories.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
So it's the intention that people that don't want to read a full novel or don't have the time, that this is intended for people that just have like an hour to read maybe every night.
It's very manageable.
I would not be reading the Boogeyman story before bed. I just want to throw that out there.
The Boogeyman story is going to be pretty scary. I mean, the Boogeyman story. Once you read the full story, I'm going to put it on Wattpad for free. I put the first story in each volume for free on Wattpad, so it'll be up on Wattpad soon. You'll get to read the story about the rats, and
nice.
That's kind of a strange thing to hear out of context, but once you read it,
maybe sleep with the lights on that night.
Right.
James, tell us a little bit. Where can we find you? I know you have a Twitter handle, website. Tell us all that.
Okay, yeah, I'm really active on Twitter and have been for years. How many followers do I have now? I have almost 46,000 followers. So if you guys want to retweet this I'll be happy to do any retweets for your Twitter handle that you want me to.
Appreciate
and
that.
then also I have a website. It's jamesdermond.com, DERMOND.com. My stories in Volume 1 were actually adapted for Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, which is a major YouTube horror channel. And they did the Halloween special with just 3 of my short stories from Volume 1. So, and that's linked on the website, and, you can get all the information about me there, like my Goodreads page and my Amazon author page are all on the website.
And we'll have that all linked in our comments as well. You can find us, the Horror Guys. We are on YouTube, obviously. We are on Twitter as well. John, you're better at this part than I am. So,
Facebook, Spotify, Twitter. Was it Apple Podcast and was it Amazon Music? Yes.
And I'm finding out that we're on podcast platforms that I've never heard of as well, which is cool. That's fine.
Hey, you're right. That works.
James, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on.
Yes.
We hope to have you on again. Maybe once the next book comes out, we could do this again.
Yeah. I mean, I could definitely come back even for Volume 5.
That would be great.
I can maybe, that'll be in October around Halloween. So
perfect timing.
Come back on it. Okay.
Best time of the year.
That is the best time of the year, at least for us.
Yes.
Definitely for me. It's my favorite holiday, of course.
Anybody have any parting words before we jump off? Before we end the recording? Anything else?
No, I just appreciate. I had a good time talking to you guys, and I appreciate being on the show.
Definitely, likewise.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming on. We appreciate it too.
All right, guys.
Thank you.
Author James Dermond, Doorways to the Unseen, Volume 3. Jeez, oh man, is out now. Volume 4 is coming out at the end of April. Keep your eyes peeled for that. We're doing a giveaway. Comment down below. Let us know what you think. If somebody's listening to the feed that's read the book, also let us know what you think. And for John and I, we'll see you next week.
Yep.
Okay. Thanks.
Fans, check out and follow the Horror Guys. You can find them on Facebook, facebook.com/The Horror Guys. On Twitter, Horror Guys 21, that's HORRORGUYS 21. On YouTube, The Horror Guys. And also on Spotify, search for The Horror Guys.
Beetlejuice.